Doctor Strange is the latest film to come out of what some have called the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That is, the title character is found in comic books produced by the Marvel Company. I have to admit to you, as a boy, I did not read Marvel comics, and I don't read them now. In fact, with the exception of an occasional Batman or Superman comic book, when I was a kid, I almost exclusively read Classics Illustrated comic books. Yes, I was one of those nerds. Thank you. However, I do like Benedict Cumberbatch, like Savannah likes Benedict Cumberbatch. And I mostly go to the movies for escapism, and Penny and I didn't have anything else better to do that night, so Doctor Strange fit the bill quite nicely. Now, as you can see from the trailer, the visual effects in this movie are stunning. And Benedict Cumberbatch does his usual masterful job of acting. But there's something different about this superhero movie. Reviewer Josh Larson puts it this way. He says, Doctor Strange is the first movie in the Marvel Universe to allow for faith in something bigger than oneself as a source of power. Other superheroes rely on brute strength or science or technology or alien muscle, but Doctor Strange learns to rely on a spiritual dimension. No, it's not Christian spirituality. It's very Eastern-oriented spirituality, but it takes us into a world bigger than the one we can experience with our five senses. And through that spirituality, Doctor Strange discovers dark forces at work. These forces seek to hurl Earth into something called the dark dimension, subjugating it to the Lord Dormammu. Don't you just love that name? Say it with me, Dormammu, Dormammu. And it's the job of Doctor Strange and his fellow sorcerers to keep this from happening. Now, before you start rolling your eyes like Lois is doing right now, let me remind you of today's reading from Ephesians. Paul says our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the spiritual forces of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. Paul says, as Christians, we are engaged in spiritual warfare. I know that makes some of you uncomfortable, but hey, I didn't tell Paul what to write, okay? You see, the early church understood how countercultural it's supposed to be a Christian, so one of the metaphors they used for the Christian life was one of conflict. That's why Paul talks about putting on the breastplate of righteousness and taking up the shield of faith and the sword of the Spirit. They weren't fighting against Dormammu, of course, but they did see themselves fighting against the principalities and powers of this world who will do anything necessary to hang on to their privilege and maintain the unjust status quo. Now, in our day and time, some of our sisters and brothers have latched on to this imagery of the spiritual warfare and declared that Christian faith in our day is under siege. Every law they don't like and every Supreme Court decision they hate is interpreted as an assault on Christianity. Particularly abhorrent are rulings favorable to LGBT rights and restrictions on political activity by churches. Religious liberty is under attack, they shout, and the call goes out to the faithful to put on the whole armor of God. But here's what I think. I don't think religious liberty is under attack in this country. Not at all. The privileges we Christians have enjoyed in the past are under attack because American culture is no longer willing to prop us up. For decades, maybe even centuries, we have relied on society in general and government in particular to make it easy to be a Christian in this country. And now that it's tough to live out your faith and to make the hard choices necessary and then be willing to suffer the consequences for them if necessary, some of our sisters and brothers are crying foul. So the demagogues are fanning the flames of fear and the faithful are unsheathing their swords, all in the name of one who said, "Those who live by the sword will die by the sword." Yes, there's spiritual warfare going on, but it's not that kind of fight. Here's what real spiritual warfare looks like. One day Satan was talking to his best demons, and he said, "We've been doing pretty well lately. Lots of folks are deciding not to follow Jesus. But we can't rest on our laurels. We need some new lies to keep people from becoming Christians. Any thoughts?" One demon said, I know. Let's tell them there's no God." And Satan said, "That's never worked. Anything else?" Another demon said, I know. We'll tell them there's a God, but God doesn't love them." Satan rolled his eyes. "Now that's the dumbest idea I've heard in a long time. You got anything else?" So the demons thought and they mumbled among themselves until at last old Satan himself said, "I think I've got it. Let's tell them there's a God. Let's tell them that God loves them. Let's even tell them life will have purpose and meaning if they follow Christ. Let's just also tell them there's no hurry." Now that's the spiritual warfare we're fighting, my friends, and no act of Congress is going to prevail against it. So how do we fight this fight? Well, the kind of power this world relies on certainly won't work. In the movie, Dr. Strange amasses great power and great strength, but in the end, it's the power of weakness that wins. When the demonic Dormammu is about to destroy Earth, Dr. Strange creates a time loop in which he faces Dormammu again and again and again and is killed by Dormammu again and again and again. Over and over, he sacrifices himself and then returns to suffer the same fate. Dr. Strange is killed in horrible ways, but he always comes back for more. And finally, Dormammu says, "End this. You will never win." And Dr. Strange says, "No, but I can lose again and again and again forever. That makes you my prisoner." And with that, Dormammu ends his assault on Earth and all its people. So you see, it's weakness that Dr. Strange discovers. And in his weakness, Dr. Strange discovers his strength. And it's in weakness that you and I discover our strength. Jesus is our model. Though he was equal with God, says Paul, he emptied himself, taking on the form of a slave. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And in that death, you and I are given life. Jesus didn't fight with guns and anger. He fought with weakness and love. And he won. He won by losing. The Apostle Paul said, "Power is made perfect in weakness." Now that's a sentiment our world will never understand any more than Dormammu could understand it. And quite frankly, anytime we Christians have thrown in our lot with the power games of Washington, Wall Street, Main Street, and Hollywood, we've always come out on the short end of the stick. But whenever Christians have followed in the way of Jesus, the way of sacrifice, the way of powerlessness, the way of love, then our world becomes a little better. If we want to change the world, you and I must act with integrity. You and I must be faithful to who we claim to be, because in our weakness, we become strong. Years ago, there was a preacher by the name of Willis J. King. Rich, if you could advance the slide. That's that handsome guy there. Willis J. King had a long and distinguished career in the AME Church in the United States. Eventually, he became bishop of that denomination. He was also the first African American in this country to earn a PhD in Old Testament. His first degree, however, was a Bachelor of Arts from Wiley College in Marshall, Texas. As you might imagine, he was the first in his family to get much education at all, much less a college degree, so his parents were bursting with pride. And after he graduated and he got home and got settled in, he said to his folks, "Tomorrow I'm going to go down to the bank and borrow $500 so I can buy a new car." You can tell this was a long time ago. His father said, "You want me to come with you, son?" King said, "No, Dad, I don't need you to come with me." And his dad said, "Well, maybe I could co-sign the note." And King said, "No offense, Dad, but how are you going to co-sign a note? You can't read. You can't write. All you can do is make an X. And now I've got a college degree." So the next morning, King tucked his diploma from Wiley College under his arm, went down to the bank, asked for a loan officer, said, "I'd like to borrow $500 so I can buy a new car." Loan officer replied, "That's fine, Mr. King. What do you have as collateral?" King said, what? Loan officer said, "Collateral, Mr. King. In order to borrow $500, you have to have something of value equal to $500. And King smiled and said, "Oh, that's what you mean. No problem. Here's my collateral." And he slid his bachelor's degree across the desk. Loan officer smiled. "Mr. King, we know what an accomplishment this is, but this degree can't count as collateral for a loan. I'm afraid I'm going to have to deny your request." Stunned, King picked up the symbol of his pride and he slowly headed for the door. He never felt so rejected in his whole life. As he walked out of the loan officer's door, he saw his father in the bank lobby, and he walked over to him and said, "Dad, what are you doing here?" His father said, "I came down here to co-sign your note." And King said, "Like I said, Dad, how are you going to co-sign a note? You can't read or write. You can only make an X." Well, just then that loan officer walked out of his office into the lobby, and he said to the younger King, "Pardon me, but I couldn't help overhearing what you said. Yes, it's true your father can't read. Yes, it's true your father can't write. Yes, it's true he can only make an X. But let me tell you something, young man. That's a mighty good X. That was the X that got you the loan to get you into school. That was the X that got the loan to keep you in school. And that was the X that got the loan to get you out of school. And if you're going to get a loan from this bank to buy a new car, that's the X that's going to get it for you." And Willis King watched as his father's calloused and wrinkled and worn fingers took the pen and marked an X on the loan application, giving him what he, with all his fancy education, could not provide for himself. Paul said, "Power is made perfect in weakness." Anybody here know how to make an X?